Dina Ionesco, I'm the head of the Migration, Environment and Climate Change Division at the International Organization for Migration. So here we are at the COP21 in Paris, and many things have happened in a at a very quick path since the past COPs. Let's recall 2 years ago the situation, the COP in Warsaw. We had a minister representing Philippines crying and calling an appeal for more attention to be given to people displaced by natural disasters and by climate change. It was after the Typhoon Haiyan had struck the Philippines, where hundreds of thousands of families were affected and hundreds of thousands of families were displaced. What have we learned since this experience? Where are we today? Has anything changed? So I would say, from the perspective of the International Organization for Migration, that we see some progress in better understanding, more awareness on the reality of disaster-induced displacement around the world. So policymakers and the broad public are much more aware that people are displaced, they have to move, they are forcibly moved by natural disasters, in particular floods and typhoons. And 90 million people were displaced by natural disaster in 2014. What have we learned? I think we learned that we need to be better prepared. We need to be better prepared to respond to the humanitarian challenge that is the displacement of people after a natural disaster. So that means really the humanitarian responses need to be in place to support the families and the affected one. What we've learned also is that we need to be better prepared in advance, so that populations are very vulnerable because they are not prepared, they are not informed, they are not ready when a disaster strikes. So the most vulnerable are the first affected. And I think that we've learned now that much more needs to be invested in disaster preparedness. And that's something that we are very encouraged, for instance, that the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction earlier this year has recognized migration as a key element in disaster preparedness and disaster management. And here in Paris we want a stronger message also on climate-induced migration, on climate migrants, so that we are prepared, so not so many people are forcibly displaced anymore. So I think one other very important change we see now at the international level in the links that are very complex between migration and climate change is that, first of all, migration is a reality. It's a reality of our contemporary world, and it's a striking reality. More people are displaced than ever by climate change. Also, many people, hundreds of thousands of people, live in areas that are submitted to climate change stress. So their livelihoods, their way of living is directly impacted, and which means that many of them will have to move. So what we need to change today in the narratives of migration and climate, it's first of all to realize, to acknowledge the reality of forced migration due to climate. So that means also here in Paris taking into account in areas such as loss and damage, to be also better prepared, but also to change the narratives about the very negative dimension we see of migration, and to realize that migration, if planned, if prepared, if well thought through, if facilitated, if discussed and put in place for very concrete methods of exchange at bilateral or regional or global levels, migration can be part of the solution. It can be an adaptation strategy. It can be a way for people to get out of harm's way. It can be a way for people to go abroad and then maybe invest back home in areas that are adaptation areas. So migrants can, in a way, be actors of the climate adaptation fight. Their remittances, their investments can go back in areas such as land rehabilitation or post-disaster responses or rehabilitation or learning skills on water management that are part of the response to climate change. So yes, we are here in the COP21 as the International Organization for Migration to change the narratives, to say that migration is, of course, in many cases a difficult, a tragedy and a loss, but in many ways it can be a progress and a positive and a way to build better, and something, if it's facilitated, well thought through, managed and planned. I forgot this.